Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Avi, and I help run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into discussion of Derecka Purnell's new book, Becoming Abolitionists, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Grill. Searching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Grill gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. With our loyal community of book lovers and authors such as Derecka, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we're thrilled to have with us Derecka Purnell for the launch of her new book, Becoming Abolitionists: Police, Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom. Derecka Purnell is a human rights lawyer, writer, and organizer. She received her JD from Harvard Law School and works to end police-prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training to community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. Her work and writing has featured in the New York Times, NPR, The Atlantic, the Boston Globe, Harper's Bazaar, Cosmopolitan, The Appeal, Truthout, Slate, and many other publications. Derecka is currently a columnist at The Guardian and co-founder of the forthcoming National Museum of Social Justice and Contemporary Activism. Joining Derecka in conversation tonight is Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor is a scholar of anti-Black racism, public policy, Black politics, and social movements. She has written 3 award-winning books, including Race for Profit: How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Homeownership, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History in 2020. She is a contributing writer for The New Yorker and professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. So without further ado, please welcome Derecka and Keeanga-Yamahtta to the stage.
Hi, you here? We here? Okay, let's go.
Go. How you doing, Derecka? It's very wonderful to be with you here on the launch of your fantastic new book, Becoming Abolitionist. The first thing I want to say is congratulations. How you doing?
I mean, I am so excited and overwhelmed and tired and energetic. I'm feeling everything, honestly, but especially grateful. I know how incredibly busy you are helping us get free through various mediums. I'm like, you're on PBS, you're on New York Times, you're on Sesame Street, you in these streets, you literally do everything. So I'm just trying to be like you. So thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So the book is fantastic. So let's just get into it. Let me just ask you. I'll get the writerly question out first, which is why. Well, there's a couple of things. One is why this book right now. There are a few books about police and prison abolition that are coming out. And so maybe a more narrow question is why this book, but what is it that you are saying in this ongoing discussion that can only be found in your book?
Oh, wow. Okay. Set me up for the hard question. No, that's a really great question. I think that when I graduated law school and I was trying to put into my lawyerly practice the politics of abolition and through organizing, through writing, just trying to figure out how to make this stuff work, I found myself coming into contact with people, especially people in St. Louis where I was lawyering and organizing at the time, who were just freeze when they would hear the word abolition, or they would be, what is this? Is this realistic? What are you talking about? And I had all of this energy. I'm like, we can do this. We can close jails. We can close prisons. We can abolish the police. And I realized that some people who are asking me questions, particularly about violence, what about the murderers? What about people who commit sexual violence? If we abolish the police, will I be safe? And I learned that there are different camps of people who ask those questions, right? There are people who are antagonistic to abolition and they ask those questions because it doesn't really matter what you say. Like, they're just going to be ready to come at you with, oh, okay, that's not realistic, don't want to hear it. But then there are people who ask those questions because they're genuinely curious if they're going to be safe in a world without police, right? I mean, people who are vulnerable to violence from their neighbors, their partners, their children, strangers, and cops. And I wanted to basically say, look, you know, we are part of a grand tradition of people thinking about how to get free in a lot of different ways. And this is something that's not novel, you know, and especially given, and you know this probably, definitely better than me, how Black mayors, Black politicians, leaders will often point to radical or progressive ideas as being white or not realistic, or they'll say, you know, they want you to have abolition in the hood, and then they go back to the suburbs, right, where they have well-functioning police. And I just got frustrated with the people I cared about being convinced by people with that message. Mm-hmm. And so I think in this particular book, it's sort of marrying those two concerns. It hopefully speaking to the violence that people actually fear, you know, like I said, in their homes and in their communities and from police. And it's through a perspective of someone who lives in those neighborhoods right now, right? It's not only I grew up in this kind of neighborhood and I fear violence, like, oh, right now, like I have to figure this out right now. And yeah, I'm committed to figuring it out with you. And here's a text to show here's someone who's skeptical of abolition, and through study, being pushed, you know, being politicized by people who were much more interested and excited and creative than I was, came to understand this politics is something that was indispensable to our freedom.
Mm. So it's interesting that you, well, it's not interesting. It's a big part of the book that you talk about your own experience as coming from a Black working class and poor community in St. Louis. In fact, you lived at one point blocks away from where Mike Brown Jr. was killed by Darren Wilson in 2014. And so one of the things I was surprised about, this isn't the surprise I mentioned earlier, but one of the things that I was surprised about is that the book really is about becoming an abolitionist, like the transformation of your ideas and, you know, I guess we could say some of your cohort through the course of the kind of, you know, Elizabeth Alexander has called it the Trayvon generation. I think it's also the Obama generation. But I found the memoir aspect of your book pretty compelling. And so I'm wondering if you could say something about what you think memoir in this case with your book brings to this story that is different than just a kind of in one sense that there are academic analyses of these questions. There are journalistic accounts of these questions. So what does memoir do that perhaps those other kinds of writing don't do?
Oh, wow. It's so funny because I resisted calling it a memoir for so many different reasons. I'm like, I'm a baby. Like, why am I out here writing memoirs? It's not a memoir. But I do love this question because I think we need lots of different texts to figure out that inform our opinion. And I think about, you know, a long tradition of Black writers who fuse memoir, sociology, from Du Bois to Baldwin. I mean, use so many different genres and able to communicate a point. And I just feel honestly very, very lucky that I get to be a lawyer. I get to be a journalist, a columnist. I get to take on that approach, right, in my column. And this was really a space for me to tell a different kind of story in a way that I would hope it's invitational, that people can see, oh, you know, the people who you see tweeting or talking or writing on columns, like they have backstories where they've tried reform. They've tried to work within this system. They tried to fix things, right? And what I hope to show that, well, people have, you know, all sorts of experiences that shape who they are, including being politicized. And I just, it started to become really natural to me the more I began to write. And I think, for example, I love Black Lives Matter to Black liberation. And I remember going through your book and just being like, oh yeah, I remember Occupy. I remember Troy Davis. I remember Black Lives. I remember all these moments, right? And reading that account, I didn't realize how connected they were, right? Like I was able to get that from the book. But then when I think about my life, I think, oh yeah, I remember organizing these protests. I remember attending this rally. I remember asking people to sign petitions. And so what I hope to do is think about some of these texts that also influenced me and just recall where I was in that particular moment. Because, a statistic may not move everyone sometime, or an interesting historical fact or nuance. But what I tried to do in this book is say, like, this is what I learned when I learned how to do this. And it was very hard. And my editor pushed me a lot to do that, because I was really resistant. I was like, no, like, this is about all of this other stuff. But it's like, well, if someone's able to see this person who is homophobic, who was, had largely unexamined politics, about themselves, about capitalism, was a young baby, like on fire Christian trying to, convert people in nightclub parking lots to get saved, right? This super pro-life person, I was a Youth Crime Watch of America, right? Like
it was deep.
It was deep. It was so deep. Which is also why I think I at least try to practice a level of generosity for people who are actually curious about shifting our politics. Because I remember being at Youth Crime Watch of America conferences, thinking about how to strengthen relationships between police and people in my schools, people in our neighborhoods. And so so once I started writing and realizing, like, yo, I was wilding back then. What was I doing? It also made me excited that for people who may be fence sitters, who may be curious, that there's some overlap in those stories too.
Well, there's, to me, part of the power of that is similar to Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow, because it's kind of, you're witnessing her awakening to a different kind of politics. And I think this was one of the reasons why this book was so widely popular, is because it wasn't told from on high. It wasn't lecturing people. It was walking people through her own process of revelation. And I think in your book, for an entire generation of people who may not have started politically where you start from, but who have the same kinds of questions and encounters with state violence and the failure of several different kinds of reform initiatives that lead them, if not to abolition, certainly on the path to asking those kinds of questions. One observation that I had with the book is that it seemed to register, to me at least, in two different ways. One is about this process you describe of becoming an abolitionist. And the second one is about the development of what we refer to now as the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement for Black lives. And I'm wondering how, for you, you see these things, how you see these things connected to each other. Because in some sense, they could be told in two separate accounts. Here's the reason why you should be an abolitionist, and here is a history of the Black Lives Matter movement. But you obviously see these, they're entwined in you in some sense.
Yes.
What can you talk some about the relationship that you're trying to examine between these two phenomena?
Yes, of course. So in 2014, when Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, a lot of people, I believe, in, I would call like my peer group, were politicized around police violence, right? You had organizers who were not organizers. I think about Kayla, who was a pharmacy tech and working at a furniture store. Now she quit her job and she became one of the most fierce organizers in the country, but especially in St. Louis, right? So I think about people who chose not to go to school, who stopped going to school in order to continue to build momentum, in order to stop police violence. And I think at the time, because of the fury, the chaos, the potential of all the possibilities of reform, it was easy when you have some of these reforms that are sort of ready-made, right? You can point to these sorts of, we just need body cameras, we need more diversity, we need more women, more people of color, we need cops to come from the communities in which they patrol and surveil and harass, right? And so when you have funding being thrown at all of these reforms, when you have a history of training being the default reform whenever something bad happens, and not necessarily being in a place yet, not yet is really important, but not being in a place yet where you're being pushed to think critically about the role, function, and purpose of police, even though you hear it culturally, you hear it in your house, they just the modern day slave catchers, NWA, F the police, all this, right? But still it's like, okay, well, we just gotta fix it. We've come a long way, we just gotta make it better. And from 2014 until 2020, at least in the mainstream, a lot of these reforms had either already been in place before the Black Lives Matter movement erupted. Many cities say, okay, we're adopting these reforms. We're going to, improve policing. We're going to do community policing. We have President Obama making sure that these consent decrees are happening all over the country. So there seemed to be some of this hope. And then, in 2020, you have this video go viral of Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd. And this is during a pandemic. This is after months of us losing our loved ones, months of watching videos of Black people getting dragged off of buses in like Philly because they don't have a mask on, because of inconsistent messaging from the government. It's like we are trying to figure out how to be supportive and in solidarity with each other. And right now, you're going to, essentially take the life out of someone's body over allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill. And so when Defund the Police sort of erupted, it was very exciting. And also it felt like a bit of a departure from Black Lives Matter. The departure for me, at least, or what I don't know, now I can't remember if I wrote about this in the book or in somewhere else, but the departure for me is that Black Lives Matter, when people start saying it a lot in 2014, 2015, it could kind of mean anything at the time. You can say Black Lives Matter, so we're going to give more money to the police, right? You can say Black Lives Matter and kneel with protesters if you're a cop. Saks Fifth Avenue was saying Black Lives Matter. Literally, it became so important to the conversation to show that you cared about or at least pretended to care, or care about the value of Black life. Defund the Police was much more specific and actionable. I didn't quite do the same thing. Unless you're just super pro austerity or libertarian, usually if you're saying defund the police, it's requiring the city or the state or the federal government to take action to remove resources. And so I thought it was much more exciting to have a specific demand, which what everyone had been saying. What does Black Lives Matter really want? And then when people started saying defund the police and abolish the police, they were like, oh, no, not that. Like, what else y'all want? Because that wasn't on the menu today. And so I saw it as an important departure, but definitely in a lineage of that tradition.
Okay, so you mentioned solidarity. One of the things that was most surprising, this is the surprise, in the book is it is so thickly layered with internationalism, which I think is fantastic, because often we talk about these issues so parochially, like this is just about either my town, my city, my state, or just about the United States. And so related to that, I want to ask you a couple of questions about this.
Of course.
One, you use the framing of the failure of the Obama administration's immigration policy as really a framing to understand also its failures at police reform. And I think one of the characteristics, at least early on, of the movement that came to be described as Black Lives Matter was this almost this sense that this was about Black people and a kind of proprietary ownership of the movement, of the slogans. People get angry if you say Brown Lives Matter. We talk about appropriation, and this is about centering Black people. And what I find so fascinating about your book is that one is as a direct person involved, tear gassed from the area, involved from top to bottom. That has nothing to do with your approach to this. That in many ways, I read your book as saying that this is an opening into developing solidarity and collaboration with other people who are impacted, sometimes directly by police, impacted in other ways. And then, some people for whom this is just about solidarity and wanting to, see an end to racist police violence and all the things that make Black people vulnerable to police violence. So I'm wondering if you could talk, one, about the immigration framework and the way that you use that as a way to talk about the failure of police reform. And then, I'm curious about internationalism and why that is so obviously important to your analysis.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of immigration, I think there's like the personal aspect that came through the memoir and then more of the political. So the personal that I write about, at least in the book, it's about the neighborhood that I grew up in, which was about half African-American, half East African, mostly refugees from Somalia and Ethiopia. And there was just so much like love and arguments and Americanism and xenophobia. I mean, all of that messy stuff. And then you would go play soccer together in the backyard with no shoes on. And so I didn't realize how unique that was to live in that sort of a neighborhood. And my mom, she was considered like the American mom to like a lot of the refugees who were there. And many of them are still like my siblings. And when we didn't have food, we were eating injera and all kinds of food that I pay way too much money for now. But it was really a part of my childhood. And I also went to an international studies high school. So where I grew up, there was constant conversation. All my early curse words were in other languages because I was constantly learning, cultures, learning about different religions, learning about people who escaped war, who escaped, just had gone through so much to try to move to America to pursue a dream. And then, all the places were relegated to live in St. Louis because it was considered an undesirable location that would discourage other refugees from coming to the United States. So learning all of this, attended an international studies high school where, just really kids there from all over the world, and not like a United Nations, like high school, but like an actual, I went to school with Bosnians. St. Louis is a huge Bosnian community. And I learned about, different people who were oppressed because they were white and because they were Muslim. So by the time I started learning about other kinds of Islamophobia, my interactions with people who were repressed were like white Muslims or Somali. It was just, I didn't have the political analysis, but I had the friendships, I had the culture, I had the love. So when I got to college and Chris Kobach was trying to push the Do I Look Illegal bill in Arizona, which he did, and then all across the country, I was like, oh, wow, like this is bad. Immigration is good. Look at my friends, look at my family, look at the people who fought to sort of be in this country, to be in this place, and was really politicized by students who were in Mecha, who were criticizing borders, who was criticizing colonialism, who were talking about indigeneity and giving me language that I didn't have, like when I was in high school or middle school, to help shape my analysis. And so by the time President Obama was running for office, I mean, I was filled with so much pride. I was, young, Black Midwesterner. I went to the inauguration. I was just so excited about the possibility of a Black president. My family was like, "You up next?" And I was like, "Me? I'm up next." I was so happy. They still say that. It's complicated. It's so complicated. I'm nervous for them to read the book, but I was just like, wow. And then I had friends that I was organizing with who were just like, "Oh, he's a deporter in chief. He's kicking our families out. He's disrupting communities, And then I started teaching in school with a high undocumented population. And I noticed how nervous they were when we go on field trips, when we would have to do stuff in the community because they didn't have Social Security numbers. And I was like, oh, for the first time, it started to click politically. Like, this person you could be excited about because they're championing a race, they're breaking barriers, they're the first, can also implement policy that's very harmful to the people you love, the people you organize with, and the people that you take in communities. And so I think part of the immigration helped give language understanding to the critique of borders, right? To the critique of policing. And we would never say we just need more diverse ICE agents. Like, that's not the goal, even though we say that for police, but that's not ultimately the problem. And I think that organizing in college helped me understand that. And then for internationalism, I think a lot of it is probably related to where I come from, though, those communities, that relationship. But then the political analysis really came from like reading Paul Robeson, reading Black socialists, reading Robin D. G. Kelly, reading, so many people who taught me the role of solidarity and being in struggle with people, other oppressed peoples around the world. And I remember I was talking to one of my friends, Justin, and I was like, "Justin, I don't know where I want to be. Do I want to be a Pan-Africanist? Do I want to be a Black international? Like, what are my options?" I was just so immersed and so excited about the possibilities of being in struggle with other oppressed people in other parts of the world. And then when I traveled outside the country for the first time, that's when I realized, like, there are people who are organizing for very specific demands that will revolutionize society. And I became deeply attracted to that because they felt so much more engaged politically than the people who I was trying to figure out what to do with. And they inspired a lot of our organizing ultimately and our political analyses.
You write a lot about your experiences in South Africa, and I'm wondering if you could talk some about that, because I always think of post-apartheid South Africa as instructive to our understanding of Black politics in the United States, what it means to go from extraordinary legal marginalization to positions of power and influence, and how that, perhaps more than anything else, then begins to illuminate the fractures that exist in what we had previously thought of as communities that were tightly wound together, and how those dynamics begin to shift when we have, as I said in my book, Black faces in high places. And so I'm just wondering what some of your experiences, how some of your experiences in South Africa have shaped your political journey.
Yeah, I think one of the most concrete ways was just watching students engage in serious political education to directly inform their demands. I mean, they would literally sit, read, debate, struggle, and then make a calculation of what to go after. I thought that was, even though I say it out loud, it sounds very simple. I know I've been a student organizer almost my entire life, literally since like maybe 8th or 9th grade. And I had always been affirmed for having really good ideas, being really passionate, but not really developing a political analysis to determine whether the ideas will put us on this path towards liberation, besides just being good and make it, So witnessing that at the age and the stage of my life that I did was really just incredibly rewarding. Watching how those students also fought against contractual labor at their universities, I thought was just hugely impactful. It reminded me of some of the student organizing that was taking place at San Francisco State in like the 60s, right? Where like they were trying to fight and create a Black Studies program. And they made sure that they were organizing with people who were janitorial workers, people who were food service workers, other Black people who were on campus who were not students, because they wanted to make sure that the space that they were creating on campus was democratic. And so to read that, read something like that about San Francisco State that was taking place 40, 50 years ago, and then to go to South Africa and watch students fight for the end of contractual labor so that their parents can get benefits from the university, so they can attend classes, right? So they can have some level of mobility. It really made me question about the level of campus organizing that I was engaged in law school. It's like, are we really writing for our faculty? For our clinical faculty? Are we really writing for janitorial, dining service workers? And then there was a strike, and we did, but it's just making that connection was just really powerful for me. I think what you said too about the more Black faces in high places, it was so painful to watch Black students attacked by Black cops and private security at WITS, especially, like to watch the brutal assault of these college students who were fighting for free education. And this is a Black administrator, a Black chancellor, Black president. The country was under ANC leadership. And to watch students be tear gassed and arrested, charged, threatened with expulsion because they wanted free education. And even before it was free education, they just didn't want an increase in their tuition. Right. And I was like, oh yeah, diversity is not salvific, right? It's not going to make sure that you are safe from harm, especially if the people who are benefiting from that exploitation get to keep, it doesn't threaten their position of power. And so it helped give more analysis to my critiques of diversity, right? Of just having more, we just need to make sure we elect more people of color, we elect more Black people. And it's like, well, we can look at lots of different countries that have people of color or Black people in power and see the wide level of exploitation that's still there for the people in those communities.
I want to ask you, well, let me just say that for me, I think probably the most intellectually interesting part of your book was the discussion about abolition democracy.
Yeah.
I thought that your unraveling of that concept that first appears in Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, but that Angela Davis has also kind of highlighted or showcased as part of her own intellectual genealogy of abolition, was really smart. And I think it really builds on this idea that you quote from Audre Lorde, that you can't use the master's tools to build a new house or build a new society. And I feel like it adds in some ways so much more depth to that, because it's not just about, we can't use the police, we can't use the courts, we can't use this criminal punishment system, but it asks much larger questions, which is really, is American society, as it has been constituted, actually capable of delivering a kind of abolition democracy? Is U.S. society capable of being democratic in the sense of having representing the voices and experiences of the vast majority of people? And I'm just wondering if you could talk more about that, because to me, it's a critique that goes much deeper than the criminal justice system. And this, of course, is the importance of the abolitionist intervention, is that it's not just about the police, and it's not just about what we are trying to tear down, but it's a system-wide critique, which in turn opens up the possibility of talking about system-wide changes.
Wow, yes, that's certainly a full question. The first thing I have to say is that the idea that I unraveled anything is just way too much to even, like, let's not. We can say that we expanded. I tried to put an offer on the table of what I think I've been shaped by Du Bois's work. But I wouldn't say that it's an unraveling. That feels like the word unraveling is just making me unravel.
Y'all, she unraveled it. So. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I think that let me talk about what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
I think that I was afraid of entering conversations with people who are excited about abolition and doing a couple of things. The first thing was romanticizing abolition, right? As if like we can just do all of this. If we make some prisons disappear, we make some cops disappear, right? Like we can just, and look at the abolitionists historically, like they were so amazing. And the more that I understood abolitionists, especially white abolitionists historically, I knew that was a bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. But today, when we tell the broad story of the anti-slavery movement, the abolitionists prevail as the heroes of that story, which is, important. A lot of them did really important work to help abolish slavery. And we should draw lessons from that abolitionist tradition. But we should also figure out where do we depart, right? Where's our sense of abolition much more broader than some of the people who are fighting for abolition? So in Black Reconstruction, Du Bois, he relies heavily on certain kinds of abolitionists, right? Not all kinds of abolitionists, but he affirms Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner. He's like, look, they were, these great people who cared about, the dignity of lots of Black people, and they were fighting to get us free. Then he also critiques them, which is very, very, very important. He critiques them because of their commitment to Pennsylvania steel, right? He's just like, look, they are abolitionists, but they're in love with these capitalists, right? And their love for these capitalists who are, doing iron and railroad, all of that stuff, it's actually getting in the way of the actual liberation that people could have, right? We don't want people to go from, slave labor to like wage slavery. Like that isn't the pipeline that we need to put people on. And so I really, really wanted to be in conversation with other people who are thinking about abolition around capitalism and around colonialism too. And at least for me, I don't know if abolition is enough to sort of reach to those things if you don't already have an analysis that's anti-capitalist or decolonial. So it's like, well, this is where I think Abolition Democracy gives us a lot of opportunity, right? We can think about the institutions we can build to absorb the most marginalized into our society. But what then I think Abolition Democracy is a bit of a limitation, because at the time when, what Du Bois is describing, if Black people would have just been absorbed into the natural order, like you said, the natural order of American society then they were still colonizing like Hawaii. They were still, murdering and stealing land from people who were indigenous, who were native to this place, right? So they were still denying people the right to vote on the basis of gender. They were still denying property to people. So the social order, being absorbed into that, I don't think was sufficient for a lot of our
burning house, right?
It's the burning house, exactly. And it's like, well, I don't know if we wouldn't have mass incarceration if abolition democracy had prevailed. I don't know if we would have police violence. I think it's very possible for all of the ills that we have today to continue to be what they are if Black people had been absorbed to the American society. I think there just would have been other kinds of groups that would have been exploited. And I don't think that should be the goal, right? I think that we should try to figure out how to undermine that American society and not say this is the thing that we need in its place.
So Ruth Wilson Gilmore says about abolition that we have to change everything. Can you, is abolition synonymous with socialism? I mean, can you be an abolitionist and not be anti-capitalist, not be a socialist?
Can you be an abolitionist and not be an anti-capitalist? I don't think so. I'm willing to be pushed. I think that if you believe in prison industrial complex abolition, right, the abolition of the carceral state, and through your political analysis, understand that the carceral state, it largely manages capitalism and social inequality, then it's very, very possible that, like, yeah, I think it would be hard to argue that. One argument maybe I could foresee is that, well, we would have to figure out under a more socialist society what inequality is going to persist and through what metrics. And if the carceral state is still going to manage whatever that produced. I would have to be convinced by that argument, which I'm not. I don't think abolition is synonymous with socialists, because I've met socialists who are anti-abolition because they think it's austerity. And I'm just like, no. There are some government programs that we should not have. We just can't protect them because they're social, because it's government funded, including the police, including prisons. But yeah, I hope that if you're an abolitionist, or at least on an abolitionist, journey, I hope that you do that with other people who are, and y'all are all pushing each other to think more critically about the economic system that produces so much inequality in this world, that police, prisons, borders, cameras, all of that go in to manage and deprive of life and liberty. I would hope that's the case.
Do you think it's possible to build a mass movement for police and prison abolition in the United States?
Yes.
Why? What makes you so confident about this?
Yeah, well, I think that, so one, I believe in what I'm spending my time in doing. If I didn't think that it was possible, I'm actually not sure if I would personally be spending my time locked in a room trying to write a book for the last 9 months about why we should build an abolitionist socialist feminist movement, right? I don't think I would do that. And I wouldn't do that in my political work. I think it's possible, especially given what happened last summer, when one of the primary demands from the streets was not simply Black Lives Matter, but it was defund the police. And I think that because of traditions of organizers, scholars, artists who've been thinking and experimenting with abolition for a long time, I feel very lucky to be alive at this particular point, where I know I may not be allowed to see all the fruits of the movement that's happening right now, but I know that there are enough people who are curious, who are interested, who are excited even, and even people who are skeptical, but probably are watching right now to see, okay, what they talking about? What's going on here? I think that's what we need. If we look, again, this is the last thing I'll say, we look at the anti-slavery movement, the abolitionists there. If we look at the civil rights movement, these movements were not wildly popular at the time. Like right now, every Black church would say, yeah, we was marching with King back in the day. No, y'all wasn't. Y'all was not out here marching with King. Y'all probably were very much on the opposite side of King. I think that when we look back at this generation of abolitionists, the abolitionists that came before us, who's been fighting to abolish the carceral state, I think people are going to be excited that they were in that tradition and not the tradition of people who are just simply trying to reform the institution. And that's what you're choosing. You're choosing which side of history you want to be on right now. And I think that abolitionists are going to be attractive enough, excited enough, and do the work that makes people want to join that movement.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm going to ask you one last thing, and I know the organizers want to take some of questions. What's your favorite part of the book?
Oh my God, that's such an unfair question.
Oh no.
Part of the book. Oh my God.
I know your favorite chapter of each of the books that I've written. So what's your favorite part?
What's my favorite part of the book? This feels like an attack. The question feels like an attack. I really love chapter 411, Abolition. I think that's because we get South Africa, we get student movements, we get the lawyering, and we get abolition democracy. All in that. I love that chapter. I also love the chapter on disability justice, which was honestly a big. I don't consider myself an expert. I don't think anyone should consider themselves to be like an expert in abolition. I consider myself an organizer and a lawyer and a writer trying to tell a set of stories. But writing about the history of disabled slaves and writing about the activism of disability justice organizers, like that was just very illuminating and exciting. It was a chapter I returned to lots of times, just to like read and reread and just, but I think Love and Abolition is my favorite chapter. This is, it's like asking
mine too.
Love and
Abolition. No, it's not. No, it's not picking your kids. It's the thing that really moves you in all sorts of ways. So that's great. These questions, am I just picking?
Yamahtta, you can read them out, or I could also facilitate the Q&A.
Yeah, feel free.
All right, no worries. Amazing conversation. Audience has so many questions, but the first one is asking, there have been some moderate politicians that equate the phrases abolishing the police and defund the police to costing suburb seats in Congress. How do we combat that narrative proposed by these lawmakers?
Well, I think it depends on the lawmakers. I think that we have to combat the narrative in writing, journalism, all of that. I also think we need people to join organizations. Like, we're not going to combat that narrative simply by tweeting, being on social media. Like, we also need people to join organizations and fight for people who are willing to be elected that represent their progressive beliefs. Like, that's the most, joining organizations is by far more than reading any book, more than following anybody. Join an organization that's doing work around, if you're interested in elected officials, around progressive elected officials, that's something I would say. I also think it's very frustrating that these politicians who are so afraid of, who claim that, we're losing seats. It's so sad that they usually have very little to say about prison gerrymandering, right? So you have all of these Black and brown people who get locked up in poor Black urban areas, and then they are shipped to prisons that are in rural communities, which then increase the amount of representation that these rural and suburban communities, often overwhelmingly Republican, red, conservative, get to send to Congress. It's like whatever seats are are lost by defund and abolition, they pale in comparison to the amount of seats that Black and brown people are losing in our communities via representation because of prison gerrymandering. And so I would hope that people who are interested in the electoral aspect of that work get involved in fights against prison gerrymandering and in fights to elect people who represent their progressive ideas.
Our next question comes from Kelly Webb. She asks, what do you think is some of the best methods to work with youth around the principles of abolition?
Best methods. My answers probably for most of these are going to be roughly the same. They're going to be political education, right? So studying texts that make sense for the campaigns that you're working on, like in the communities where you are. So it's the combination. So the studying and struggling like around these ideas, right? Developing a political analysis and putting them into practice through working on a campaign, and then figuring out how to grow your campaign, how to invite people in your community into the movement that you're trying to build, and also into the political education that you're learning and journeying on together. And that's true no matter any age, like you should be connected to someone who's groups of people who are helping to build your analysis and helping to put that analysis to work.
Okay.
Both questions are really good questions.
This question is asking, you have mentioned that abolishing the police is not something that can be done overnight. What do you feel is a realistic time frame for this to become a reality? Are there any parameters that have to be met before change begins?
Oh, this is a good question. I believe that abolition is always in the making. that it's not just about dismantling the carceral state, right? It's not just about abolishing prisons and police, and we disappear all of the repressive tools of the government and we keep everything else. And so what's exciting is that right now there are tons and tons and tons of organizations who are currently helping us to become better people, to form better relationships with each other in our communities, better relationships with the planet. And so I'm thinking from the Green New Deal to the Red Deal. I mean, there are, grassroots organizations from New York City, literally to California, to Texas, to Canada, who are trying to figure out how to build the world that we deserve right now and in the future. I think the erosion of police should and will come alongside that. And so it's not like we're gonna abolish all police by the year 2080. I don't think it's going to be a periodic transition that way. I do think that we're going to continue to build and fight for some of the changes we need right now. And alongside, what we need is for people to continue to undermine police funding at the federal, state, and local level. Some people usually ask me, why can't we just build everything first and then abolish the police? Because I would feel so much better if we had everything in place and then we started removing or defunding the police. And my fear with that approach is that historically, cops have undermined progressive ideas that then result in their funding. Police disrupt gang truces, right? I mean, they destroy Black Panther Party's meals that they were feeding to Black children in Philly and in Chicago. They destroyed a community health clinic, right? They were fighting with the young lords who were trying to run a breakfast and education program out the churches of basements, out the basements of churches. And so we can't wait for the good things we want to happen first and then abolish police. They both have to happen at the same time over time until the carceral state is obsolete.
Okay. This question asks, if it is a mass movement, I'm guessing in regards to abolition, if it is a mass movement that can be built, should it be Black-led? And how do co-conspirators support a Black-led movement?
It depends on which Black people. It depends. It depends. I feel like we should have another conversation about Black-led and censoring. I have very complicated ideas about defaulting to anything that's just Black-led or just woman. It makes me nervous because I've seen all kinds of Black leadership. I don't essentialize Blackness. Like, I don't think we're inherently superior at leading anything. I do think that any movement without Black people is absolutely and fundamentally unjust. So we shouldn't have an absence of Black people. I think that it should be led by lots of different people who are willing to fight and struggle, especially people who are low wealth and working class and class exploited. I think it has to come from a group of people who are willing to do that work. I expect Black people to be there because we're among the most exploited class in this country, right? On the planet, people will argue. But I don't think that we should have 10 Black people leading the abolition movement. I think there's already a lot of Black leadership in the abolitionist movement, and we should continue that. But I think there's room for a lot of people to get on board.
I think also part with that is that a lot of times mainstreams tries to categorize minorities, Black people or brown people, as one-dimensional. And Black people are not one-dimensional. Like, they come in all facets, ideologies. So very good point. And then this is a question.
Oh, wait, 1 second. Really quickly. Let me answer the second part of that question. I also get asked a lot about how to be a good ally or a co-conspirator. Co-conspirator is like an upgraded version of an ally now. Everyone's trying to be a co-conspirator. It's like ally ran, so co-conspirator can fly. Look, I think we need organizers. We don't need people, at least me, the people who I organize with, I don't see the people in that space who are not Black as co-conspirators. I see them as people who are organizing and fighting for liberation because they care about liberation too. And they're not just showing up to support me. Like I don't. That's at least in the spaces that I organize. So that hasn't been the case. Like they have a stake in this fight. They understand white supremacy is bad for them too, or patriarchy is bad for them too, or heterosexism is bad for them too, and so they have a stake in eradicating these institutions of oppression, and not because they're doing me a favor, not because they're looking out for me, but because they know that their liberation is bound in it as well.
Absolutely.
This next question comes from Angelica, age 9, and she asks, "What do we do about people who do bad things?"
Oh, hi, Angelica, age 9. Oh, it's so precious. What do we do about people who do bad things? Angelica, I really think it depends on what kinds of bad things, right? So people do bad things for lots of different reasons. There are people who do bad things like pollute the earth because they have the power to pollute the earth. And their pollution, it hurts and it kills so many people all around the world. And so if we want to do something with them, I think it's on us to get a lot of our friends together, a lot of people in our family, people in our community, to stop them from having the power to do bad things on the earth. There are some people who do bad things, in the world, like litter, right? And so we should probably treat people who litter differently than people who pollute the earth, or they're people who harm, or people who fight. They're people who fight because they're afraid. They're people who fight other people because they're defending themselves. They're people who fight other people because their skin is a different color. So I think that if we start working to abolish the police, it can give us more tools and more resources to understand the specific reasons why people do bad things, so we can come up with better communities and better responses of accountability to why they do the bad thing in the first place. But that was a great question, Angelica. Thank you.
Amazing. And I feel this next question also connects to Angelica's question. And I feel like the answer might be more visionary and hopeful. And Abe asked, what does a system that centers healing and care look like?
Well, that's up for all of us to decide, right? I have my own ideas of what I would be really excited about, the kind of world I want to live in. I write about it in the conclusion of the book, and I'm not going to say what it is, but you should just buy the book. If you can't afford the book, hit me up. I'll make sure you get a copy. But I have so many wonderful ideas, and there are people who practice restorative justice and transformative justice. I think it really depends on the unique situation. But I think what's exciting about abolition is that it's an opportunity for lots of us to choose what those systems of care and accountability look like, instead of us just continuing to use the systems that we have in place that bring so much violence and destruction to the world. So whoever asked that question, I hope you figure out what that means for you, and then you connect with other people to do what? Political education, and organize to figure out how to make that world possible.
Amazing. Definitely enlightening. Again, I told you behind the scenes, thank you so much for writing this book. Definitely sheds light on a topic that much too often people just hear the phrase, they automatically just block it out. But you dwell into the subject, you explain it clearly. So hopefully, if our audience member still hasn't bought a copy of Becoming Abolitionists by Derecka Purnell, you could do so by clicking on the green link at the bottom of your screen. Derecka, Keeanga, thank you both so much. What an amazing, amazing night.
Of course. Thank you so much.
You.
Your questions were amazing. I'm so honored. This is literally the dream come true. So thank you so much for even just taking time to prepare, to read the book, to do everything. Like, I truly appreciate it. And to the interpreters, thank you so much for making sure that everyone could participate in the community. I really, really appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.